All right, let's dive into a company called Energy Fuels because they are planting a flag right in the middle of a massive geopolitical story, America's mission for mineral independence. And we're not just talking about uranium for nuclear power. No, this is also about the rare earth elements that are absolutely essential for, well, pretty much everything, from EVs to the most advanced defense tech. And trust me, they are making some incredibly bold moves to get a grip on that supply chain.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Their CEO, Mark Chalmers, really lays out the ambition here. Pay attention to those two words, global and critical. This isn't just about being a U.S. miner. It's about building an international powerhouse based on materials the entire world has decided it cannot live without.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at their three-part strategy, which covers uranium, rare earths, and their global supply chain. Then, and this is crucial, we'll get real about the risks involved. And we'll wrap it up with the final equation for any potential investor. Okay, let's get right into their core strategy. You see, Energy Fuels is making a huge bet on diversification. They're trying to evolve from being just a uranium miner into something much, much bigger. I mean, the CEO says it himself. They're basically three businesses in one. And you really have to understand that to get what they're doing. It's three distinct but connected operations, each with its own market, its own set of challenges, and its own massive upside. This slide really lays it all out. Think of it like this. Step 1 is their uranium foundation. That's the bedrock, the cash flow. Step 2 uses that cash to fire up their rare earths engine. And step 3, that's the global supply chain, which is all about finding the fuel from around the world to keep that engine roaring. Let's start with that foundation. Pillar 1, uranium. So Pillar 1 is their original business, their bread and butter uranium. You know, with the whole world looking at nuclear again for clean, carbon-free energy, this kind of old-school operation is suddenly right back in the spotlight. Get this, 48 million pounds. That's the staggering amount of uranium that U.S. nuclear reactors chew through every single year. The United States is the biggest consumer on the planet, which creates this enormous, built-in customer base right at home. But here's the kicker. The U.S. imports over 95% of it. That is a massive, and I mean massive, strategic vulnerability. So naturally, Washington is scrambling to fix this, which is a huge tailwind for one of the few domestic producers left standing, a company just like Energy Fuels. So here's their game plan to help fill that gap. They're bringing production back online, but they're doing it smartly. They're aiming for over 1 million pounds next year, maybe 2 million by 2026, and, this is key, they have the existing capacity to scale all the way up to 5 million pounds a year if the price is right. And remember, this is the cash engine that's supposed to fund everything else. Now for Pillar 2. And honestly, this is the real game changer, their biggest bet. This is where the story pivots from just being about energy to being about high-stakes geopolitics and the global race for technological supremacy. So what in the world are rare earth elements, or REEs? Well, despite the name, they aren't all that rare. But they are absolutely critical. They're the secret sauce in the powerful magnets inside EV motors, giant wind turbines, and even the guidance systems for missiles. Simply put, without them, the green energy transition and modern defense, they just don't happen. And this chart, wow. This chart tells you everything you need to know about the problem. China controls nearly 90% of the world's refined rare earths. That is a stranglehold. It gives them incredible leverage over pretty much every critical high-tech industry on the planet. So how on earth does a company like Energy Fuels even begin to compete with that? Well, with this, the White Mesa Mill in Utah. This is their ace in the hole. It is the only licensed and operating conventional uranium mill in the entire United States. It was built for uranium, sure, but it turns out it's also perfectly capable of processing monazite sands, a key source of rare earths. Their entire strategy hinges on turning this single facility into the heart of a brand new, non-Chinese supply chain. Which leads us directly to Pillar 3. If the Utah mill is the engine, well, an engine needs fuel, right? And that is precisely the goal of their global supply strategy. Go out and acquire the raw materials from all over the world to feed their hungry rare earth processing machine back home. And here's a look at the pieces they're putting on their global chessboard. They made a huge move acquiring the Toliara project in Madagascar. They've got a joint venture in Australia called the Donalds Project, and they're exploring for more in Brazil. What's the common thread here? See it in the last column, monazite, monazite, monazite. It's the exact feedstock their Utah mill is designed to process.
Okay, so that is the grand three-part vision. It sounds impressive, ambitious, maybe even revolutionary. But as any smart investor knows, ambition and risk are two sides of the same coin. So now we have to flip that coin over and look at the challenges, pulling these points directly from what the company itself discloses.
So, what are the headwinds you absolutely have to consider? Well, let's break them down into three big categories: market risks, operational risks, and of course, political risks.
First, the market. Commodity prices for things like uranium and rare earths can be wildly volatile. And when it comes to rare earths, you're not just competing against another company. You're competing against state-subsidized Chinese giants that can manipulate prices in ways a Western company just can't.
Then you have the operational risks. Let's be blunt, mining is a tough, speculative business. Things go wrong. Developing these huge international projects is going to cost a fortune, and you have to note the company has a history of negative cash flow. Executing this plan will require a ton of capital and near flawless performance.
And finally, there's the stuff that is completely out of their hands: political risk. At home, you've got permitting battles and the risk that a new administration changes the rules. And when you're operating in places like Madagascar or Brazil, well, that adds a whole other layer of geopolitical uncertainty you can't control.
So after all that, when you put it all together, what's the final equation? What does this look like for an investor? It really boils down to a classic high-stakes debate: the bull case versus the bear case. The bull case is compelling. It says Energy Fuels is a one-of-a-kind US-based champion with a unique processing advantage, perfectly positioned to ride the massive waves of the energy transition and the push to bring supply chains back home. The bear case, though, is that this is just too much, too fast. It's an incredibly complex strategy with huge execution risk spread across three very different, capital-hungry businesses, all while trying to compete with state-backed giants in politically tricky parts of the world. And that really leads us to the ultimate question you have to ask yourself. Can this company actually pull it off? Can they successfully fight a war on three complex fronts: uranium, rare earths, and global logistics, to become the cornerstone of America's critical mineral independence they want to be? The answer to that question is everything. Now, everything we've talked about in this explainer is based on the company's own public filings. So if you want to really get into the weeds and check the numbers yourself, we highly recommend you go to the source, their investor relations website.